Today, we're counting down 10 Australian rules Americans can break without even realizing it. And number 1 is so ordinary that an American could break it before they've even finished their first coffee. So let's start with number 10. Number 10. Don't assume the left lane is the slow lane everywhere. Australia drives on the left, and that changes your instincts immediately. If you're an American driver, your brain has been trained around right-side driving. Your steering wheel, lane positioning, turning habits, and road awareness all have to adjust. Suddenly, the car coming from what feels like the wrong direction isn't wrong at all. You're the one who has to rethink everything, and then you encounter Australian roundabouts. To an experienced Australian driver, a roundabout is routine. To a visitor, it can feel like someone took the rules of an American intersection, turned them upside down and said, "Good luck." But here's the important part. This isn't just about remembering to drive on the left. Australian roads have their own signs, lane markings, giveaway rules, speed limits, and local variations. So if you're visiting, don't rely on instinct. Learn the local road rules before driving. Because one wrong assumption on the road isn't a funny cultural mistake. It can become a serious safety problem. Now here's where things get interesting. The next rule has nothing to do with driving, but Americans can break it before they even realize they're doing it. Number 9. Don't assume every conversation needs to be formal. Australian social interaction can be remarkably casual. Someone might joke with you, tease you, call you a nickname, or speak in a relaxed way that sounds surprisingly informal to an American visitor. And sometimes the joke is actually a sign that the person is comfortable with you. This can create a fascinating cultural misunderstanding. An American might think, "Wait, are they making fun of me?" Faux suis, while the Australian is thinking, "We're just having a laugh." Of course, Australians aren't all the same. And workplaces, age groups, regions, and individual personalities matter. But casual communication is an important part of Australian culture. So if someone makes a light joke about you, don't immediately assume you've offended them. You might actually be getting welcomed into the conversation. But there's another side to this. Australians can also dislike behavior that feels overly boastful or self-important. Walking into a conversation and constantly talking about how successful, wealthy, important, or impressive you are may not have the effect you expect. Sometimes the Australian reaction is basically, "All right, mate, settle down." And that brings us to number 8. Number 8. Don't automatically treat every public space like a private business. One thing that can surprise Americans is how important public spaces can be in Australian communities. Parks, beaches, walking paths, playgrounds, libraries, outdoor recreation areas, and community facilities can become part of normal everyday life. But there's an unwritten expectation. If a space is shared, you have to share it properly. You can't simply behave as though you own the entire area. Don't block pathways. Don't leave rubbish behind. Don't ignore posted restrictions. Don't assume that because nobody is standing there watching you, anything goes. The whole point of a public space is that other people are supposed to enjoy it too. And Australians can be particularly protective of beaches and outdoor environments. Imagine arriving at a beautiful Australian beach, seeing a perfect spot and thinking, "This is mine for the afternoon." Not quite. Other people were there before you, and other people will be there after you. So clean up after yourself, respect signs, respect local restrictions, and remember that public doesn't mean private. And speaking of public spaces, number 7 is one that can completely change how an American experiences everyday Australian life. Number 7, don't ignore the queue. Australians may have a reputation for being relaxed, but that does not mean Australians have abandoned the concept of waiting your turn. In many everyday situations, cutting in line is a quick way to make strangers notice you for all the wrong reasons. You might see people waiting at a cafe, shop, attraction, transport stop, or service counter. The rule is simple. Figure out where the line starts and join it. Don't casually drift toward the front because you think you're only asking a quick question. And don't assume that being in a hurry automatically gives you priority. Number 5. Respect wildlife warnings. Australia has a reputation for dangerous animals, but the real lesson isn't everything in Australia wants to kill you. That's an exaggeration. The real lesson is that wildlife signs exist for a reason. You might see warnings about kangaroos, wombats, koalas, livestock, or other animals depending on the area. And when you're driving, especially in rural or regional areas, you should take those warnings seriously. A road sign isn't there because someone thought a kangaroo would make the scenery look cute. It can be a genuine warning that animals may cross the road. The same principle applies around beaches, parks, bushland, and other natural environments. Don't approach wild animals simply because you want the perfect photograph. Don't feed wildlife unless it is specifically allowed and appropriate. And don't assume an animal is harmless because it looks adorable. The best Australian wildlife experience is usually the one where you observe from a safe distance. Now, number 4 is one of those rules that Americans can break simply because they are trying to be helpful. Number 4, don't assume every situation requires you to speak loudly or take over the conversation. Australians can value a more relaxed communication style, particularly in ordinary social situations. Imagine you're in a group and something goes wrong. An American visitor might instinctively become more vocal. Okay, everyone, here's what we're going to do. But depending on the situation, that can come across as overly forceful. Sometimes Australians prefer to work things out calmly, make a joke, or simply get on with it. Again, this isn't a universal law of Australian behavior. Australia is diverse, and people behave differently. But if you're visiting, watching how the people around you communicate can tell you a lot. You don't need to perform. You don't need to prove you're the loudest person in the room. Sometimes the most Australian thing you can do is relax. And we're down to the final 3. These are the rules that reveal something much deeper about how Australian society works. Number 3. Don't assume every Australian service works exactly like the American system you're used to. This can apply to healthcare, schools, public services, transportation, shopping, and countless other everyday experiences. An American may arrive with expectations based entirely on how things work back home. Then Australia does something differently, and the first reaction is, why do you do it like that? But that's exactly the trap. Different systems exist because countries developed different institutions, laws, expectations, and social priorities. So instead of assuming the Australian way is wrong because it isn't familiar, ask why it works that way. That's the whole point of cultural discovery. You're not just collecting weird facts. You're learning why ordinary life developed differently. And that brings us to number 2. Number 2, don't assume Australian slang means exactly what it sounds like. This might be one of the easiest ways for an American to misunderstand a conversation. Australians shorten words, use nicknames, and have expressions that can sound completely unfamiliar to outsiders. A word can be friendly in one context and confusing in another. And sometimes the funniest part is watching an American try to decode an ordinary Australian conversation like it's a secret language. The solution is simple. Ask. If you don't understand something, don't pretend you do. Australians will usually be happy to explain, and once you start understanding the expressions, you may find yourself using them without realizing it. But now we've reached number 1. And this final rule isn't really about driving slang, cues, wildlife, or public spaces. It's about something much bigger. Number 1, don't assume your way of doing something is the only normal way. This is the rule Americans can break without realizing it, because everyone does it. We grow up believing our routines are simply how life works. We know how schools should operate. We know how roads should work. We know how restaurants should serve food. We know what children should be allowed to do. We know what a normal neighborhood looks like. We know what good customer service feels like. Then you travel somewhere else, and suddenly someone does something completely differently. And your brain immediately says, that's weird. But here's the twist. To them, you're the weird one. That's what makes Australia and America so fascinating to compare. Both countries share language, history, media, and cultural connections. Yet everyday life can still feel surprisingly different. The goal isn't to decide which country wins. It's to notice the invisible rules that people follow without thinking. If you enjoyed seeing Australia through American eyes, subscribe to AussieLens. We're going deeper into Australian schools, roads, food, healthcare, cities, and more.